What's up, ladies and gentlemen? It is time for Coop's Fantasy Football Fiasco. I'm Andrew Cooper, and today we are breaking down another division. Next week, we're going to do one big show breaking down the AFC West and the NFC West. Today, though, AFC North. We've done 5 already. So if you haven't checked those out, check them out after the show. What we're doing here, folks, is we're going through each team, right? I've gone through and written an article on each team, and I've broken down every position, looked at the contracts, looked at the cap space, looked at the depth chart, look at the team needs, and we're trying to figure out what they're going to do this offseason and see how we can take advantage for fantasy football. And to help you guys out, I went and kind of color-coded each one. So let's get right to it. Let's pull the first team up, the Bengals here. And here's how the chart works. The green is going to be guys that are safely on the team and their role is locked in, right? Joe Burrow under contract, locked in, right? The yellow guys are guys I think are going to be on the team. They're not going to get released, but their role as far as fantasy football goes isn't necessarily safe. And we'll talk about each one of these guys, how that affects them. The red guys are guys that could be released or traded. And the white guys are guys that are currently not under contract, whether they're free agents, exclusive rights free agents, restricted free agents, you name it. That's how it's set up here. So first team here, Cincinnati Bengals. Man, this team is ready to compete now. And I think that based on the cap going up, we could see a lot of these guys actually coming back here. So let's start with the quarterback. Joe Burrow, locked in, ready to go. He's the highest paid quarterback in the league right now. So everybody else looking around at guys like Dak Prescott and Tua and what to pay them with, the cap going up and the way things are moving, that's the standard right now. It'll be interesting to see if teams look at those type of players and say, okay, we're going to make them the highest paid player in the league. Because if you're a Dolphins fan, you probably want Tua locked up, but in your mind, sometimes it doesn't feel right when they go out and make Tua or somebody like that the highest paid quarterback in the league, paid more than Joe Burrow. So we'll see. But if you're a Bengals fan, you got to be happy you got that guy locked up. Jake Browning, I had so many people, I saw these tweets and people on Reddit and stuff saying, oh, our team should bring in Jake Browning. He looked good with the Bengals. That was never honestly a possibility. People were just looking and seeing the word free agent next to his name without realizing he was an exclusive rights free agent. So there are kind of there are 3 types of free agents really. And the short and sweet is that unrestricted free agents can sign anywhere, right? If you're a restricted free agent, that means they can put a tender on you. That essentially means that if another team wants to negotiate with you, they need to compensate you, right? So like if you had a guy that was you could put a first or second round pick tender on the guy, and then, they get paid X amount, which, it's like $5 million. But if another team wants to negotiate with that guy, they would have to give you a pick though. And, then there's the last one, the exclusive rights free agent. These are guys that generally are free agents. They've been in the league for 3 years or so. And if you have that tag, teams can keep you on the team and the contract is just under $1 million and no one else can negotiate with you. Exclusive right free agents, for the most case, if these guys are any good at all, they get kept, right? So Jake Browning, they can keep him for like $900,000. They already announced they're doing it. So Jake Browning's not going anywhere. The Bengals are all set at quarterback, in my opinion. You have Burrow as a starter. Jake Browning is the next guy. If they want to add some developmental guy to be the emergency QB3, they can do that if they want. But for fantasy football purposes, it doesn't matter for us. At running back, this is the controversial one. Shout out to the chat. See you guys popping in. Anthony, what's happening, buddy? Happy Friday. Thanks for popping in. People, if you have questions about anything, throw them in here, man. I mean, we're just talking, AFC North. But if you want to have questions on these teams, on anything, on your dynasty teams, whatever, throw them in the chat, man. We're just hanging out talking ball today. But yeah, Joe Mixon, so many people are saying that they think he's going to be gone. And it's been really interesting because people that haven't been following this closely, Joe Mixon last year, they essentially said that all these beat writers are saying that he's going to be cut. They were talking about the charges against him, all this stuff. And then when the Bengals decided to keep him and they restructured his deal, he came out and by name named a few guys, beat writers, that he's not going to talk to anymore. And him and his agent came out. So he actually in the locker room pointed at a few people and said the names of the places they write and said, I'm not talking to you. I'm done talking to you and you know why, right? And his agent came out and clarified that there's specific names of people. Like, for instance, he won't talk to Jay Morrison of Pro Football Network, right? Like Joe Mixon is done talking to him, right? And Jay Morrison, once again this year, came out and wrote an article, said Joe Mixon should be released. So, I mean, on one hand, you look at his contract and think, oh, maybe it is time to move on. They have Chase Brown. On the other hand, this guy doesn't really get along with Mixon. He's in the locker room trying to talk to people on a regular basis. It would be in his best interest for Mixon to be gone. Now, on top of all that, while this stuff is going out and being tweeted, somebody tweets an article that says Joe Mixon's a cut candidate. Joe Mixon himself quoted that tweet and said, we went through this last year. This is clown behavior, essentially saying he's not going anywhere. And in my opinion, I think they're going to figure out Joe Mixon's going to stay. There is a deadline coming up that's huge for Joe Mixon, right? March 11th is the day that the legal tampering period opens. That's the opening of free agency, right? Contracts will be announced during that span. On March 18th, so essentially later that week, Joe Mixon has a roster bonus that hits that is an additional almost $4 million, right? So if they're going to release him, it has to be before that date. If they don't release him before that date, he's on the team because essentially they would just be wasting that money. So we'll know for sure whether he's on the team by March 18th. But in my opinion, he's going to be on this team. He took less money not only last year but this year. He already knocked $5 million off of his contract for 2024 to stay with the team. If they release him, that saves $5.8 million. You look around at what these backs are expected to get, and like even a guy like Zach Moss is projected to get paid like $4 million. So do they really want to go through the process of cutting Joe Mixon, right? To get $5.8 million, only to give $4 million to a guy like Zach Moss, who might not even be better than Joe Mixon at this stage, and they'd have to they'd have to teach him the whole offense. They would have to, they'd have to teach him the pass blocking scheme, all these things. I think what's most likely here is for them to keep Joe Mixon. Maybe they even do a contract like Michael Thomas last year where there's incentives and things like that. Although it would be tough to do incentives for a guy that just had the 8th most yards from scrimmage of any running back, that finished as the RB7 or RB6, depending on your format in fantasy football. To me, Joe Mixon, if you're competing to win now, he's a buy. And that's honestly, it's a controversial statement among some. People think he's going to get released. I don't think he is. I think he's going to be the starting running back for the Bengals. People love Chase Brown, but that's fantasy wishing for those type things to happen. And that's where we can take advantage. There's not too many real buy low candidates. Like people come up with their buy low articles, and it's usually guys that everyone loves, like Chase Brown. It's never somebody like me saying, hey, if you're in a win now situation, you can get Joe Mixon for a 2nd round pick, and he's probably going to be an RB1 again in fantasy football. He's been a top 10 RB in fantasy football for 3 straight seasons. Over the last 3 seasons, he's top 5 in rushing yards, behind only guys like Jonathan Taylor and Derrick Henry and Najee Harris, right? So Joe Mixon, I'm in. Even though he's red on the chart because there's rumors he could be cut or traded or whatever, I don't think he is. I think he's going to be the Bengals starting running back. And in all my dynasty leagues, I play to win now in all of them. Like if I take over an orphan team, which we'll talk about that coming up in a little bit, then I blow it up. But I'm keeping Joe Mixon because I play to win, right? So Joe Mixon, go out and get him. Chase Brown's an interesting guy too. You look at him, he's a stash in dynasty, in my opinion. I don't think he's going to take over as starting running back. I just kind of laid out why that's the case, in my opinion. But this is a guy that is very explosive. Like 40% of his runs last year were considered breakaway runs, going for like 10 yards or more. He had a couple of receptions down the sideline that looked really cool. I mean, his highlights are awesome. He's a day 3 pick. So it's hard to say if they would just cut Mixon and give the keys to the car to Chase Brown. But I mean, I gave my opinion. It's on the table that it could happen. So Chase Brown's a guy I don't mind stashing. What I'm doing, and I tweeted this out, is I'm buying Joe Mixon now. And then when it seems clear that Joe Mixon is going to be the starter, I'll go and buy Chase Brown too. Right. Like I like both these guys. You don't have to like one and not the other. In a lot of my dynasty leagues, I had Zeke Elliott and I had Tony Pollard. Like I had both players, and if Zeke got hurt, I would start Pollard, and when Zeke left, I started Pollard. It wasn't amazing, but having Joe Mixon and Chase Brown is actually not a bad move at all. Travion Williams is an unrestricted free agent. The argument to bring him back would be that he returns kicks, and I see Better Boss in the chat, free Travion Williams. Yeah, I mean it just, to me, the situation is this: if you're a Travion Williams fan, you want him to leave the Bengals because he kind of got leapfrogged by Chase Brown last year, right? So that's kind of an indictment for that situation. And if they bring him back, it will be to return kicks. That's what he did for them last year. So you don't want him coming back here just to return kicks. You want him to go into another team where, maybe they wanted to return kicks, but maybe he also gets a role in offense. Like if Washington, for instance, loses Antonio Gibson, not only was he their pass down back, but he also returned kicks. So if Travion Williams slides in there and they think he's better than Gibson, and Brian Robinson is a starting back, that's the path to relevancy for a guy like Travion Williams. So you want him to leave if you are a fan of his in fantasy football. If you're a Bengals fan and you just want him to return kicks, then there you go. Chris Evans is a guy, didn't really pan out so far. We thought he was going to be a pass down back that was getting a lot of looks, but he really hasn't carved out that role. He can return kicks in the absence of Travion Williams, but I really don't expect him to have much fantasy relevancy there. So that's the running back depth chart. I think they keep mixing. I think they keep Chase Brown. They just got to find somebody to return kicks. Could be Chris Evans, could be somebody else, but that's the way I feel about it. At wide receiver, Jamar Chase is already locked in, super megastar. They just got to figure out what they're going to pay him, and it's going to be he's going to be the thing is, Justin Jefferson also needs to be paid. Those two guys are going to be the two highest paid wide receivers in the league. They're going to reset the market, coming up next year or during the year this year. And it's just a matter of they should probably both get matching contracts that are like the top of the league because they're great players. So don't really need to say much about Jamar Chase. Easily him and Justin Jefferson in single quarterback leagues, the two most valuable dynasty assets there are. No question. Because the age apex for wide receivers is a lot farther down the road than it is for running backs. So like you look at it right now and you've got like a Breece Hall or Jahmyr Gibbs versus like a CeeDee Lamb, a Jamar Chase, or a Justin Jefferson. And the difference is how these guys age, right? So at running back, the age apex is like 22 to 25, and they can score a lot of points. They could be the highest scoring players, but they kind of fall off a cliff. A good example right now is Tyreek Hill. Today is his birthday. He turned 30 years old today, Tyreek Hill. He was arguably the best wide receiver, him and CeeDee Lamb. But at 30 years old, we can make an argument that Tyreek Hill should be the number one wide receiver, drafted in fantasy football at 30, right? Whereas a guy like Zeke Elliott is actually only 28 years old. But because of the way running backs age and the wear and tear, he's already well down on the trajectory. You look at guys like Randy Moss had his best season in fantasy football over the age of 30. So did Jerry Rice. So did Marvin Harrison. So did a bunch of guys. I mean, like for the most part, 27 years old to 29 is the age apex for wide receivers, but they age a lot better, right? So that's why those guys are the most valuable assets. Tee Higgins just got franchise tagged. The question is whether he plays on the tag or whether they figure out a long-term deal, but he'll get, like $20 million this year. So hard for him to argue with that. It's bad news for Andre Yosivas, who was behind him on the depth chart here. So people were hoping that he could step in that Tee Higgins role, but if Higgins is going to be there, it doesn't really matter. At slot is where they need to figure something out. Tyler Boyd's bending long-term slot guy. Trenton Irwin is an unrestricted free agent. He's probably the second most slot behind him, but he's also a free agent. And then Charlie Jones would be the third man up. If both Boyd and Irwin are gone, Jones could be an interesting guy. Charlie Jones will be on the team no matter what, not just because he was a fourth-round pick last year, but he also returned all the punts. So if Travion Williams is returning kicks, Charlie Jones returning punts. I want to see what happens there. With Tyler Boyd, maybe I might be the only person saying this, but like he's kind of a sneaky ad in your dynasty leagues because we watched him be a every down wide receiver for a brief period there, opposite of AJ Brown, right? And he would play flanker on 2 wide receiver sets, then come in and play slot for 3 wide receiver sets, right? But he stayed on the field all the time, and he had back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons. Then they got, Tee Higgins and Jamar Chase. Now he's a part-time player. If another team out there wants to pay Tyler Boyd a bunch of money and have him be a full-time player, he could see a bounce back here. As crazy as that sounds. And Tyler Boyd, we feel like he's really old. He's 29. He's younger than Tyreek Hill, who I just mentioned. He's younger than a bunch of guys that we like that I'm going to talk about on this show. For instance, like Amari Cooper. He's younger than Amari Cooper, right? Definitely younger than like DeAndre Hopkins, Keenan Allen. So it's actually not crazy to suggest that we could see Tyler Boyd have a little bounce back. I see Jeremy in the chat. What's happening, man? That's my guy over on with the Reddit in those Reddit streets, bro. My chat account. Some commentary on Reddit yesterday about Chase being overrated and then he doesn't have the elite upside of a JJ Lamb, etc. To me, I think he does in individual seasons. But the thing with JJ and Lamb is, as of now, they haven't had a Tee Higgins on the team or even a Tyler Boyd to some degree, where they're in it like CD Lamb is getting 150, 160, 170, 180 targets because the second target on the team is Jake Ferguson. When you have Tee Higgins on the team, right, and or even Boyd, then that ceiling does get limited to some degree. We've also, Chase has been hurt, Joe Burrow has been hurt. I think he has that in his range of outcomes. It's just proof that you need everything to go exactly right to get there. Like, Justin Jefferson, look at him, right? You want to compare Chase to Jefferson. Well, Jefferson was in a situation where he was getting absolutely peppered with targets with Kirk Cousins, who doesn't run, and it was a perfect situation. But Jefferson got hurt last year. Kirk Cousins got hurt last year. He didn't pan out last year, and then now he's going to come back to Jordan Addison in the second year. T.J. Hawkinson, who hurt his knee, but he'll be back, and we don't even know if Cousins is going to be back. So there's arguments to be made about for a lot of these guys. Lamb is the one that I love right now, honestly, potentially even as the number one, because he's 24 years old. He just had the 13th most fantasy points of any wide receiver literally ever in a season. I know there's 17 games now, but he was the only player that wasn't a quarterback that had 400 points in PPR last year. It was him and CMC at the top. I tweeted this the other day, or yesterday actually. Only 4 players in all of fantasy that weren't quarterbacks had 300 points, and Lamb had 400. So there you go. That is my take on that. I think all those guys are capable of finishing as the wide receiver one in any given season, right? So that's why we take them all there, and that's why they're so valuable in Dynasty. Is that over the next 5 years, I wouldn't be surprised if Lamb had one and Jefferson had one and Chase had one. So yeah, I think they're all elite talents in my opinion, man. You can't go wrong with them. And I wouldn't trade them for a running back, and you can't really trade them for a different wide receiver. So if you have Jamar Chase, you just hang on to him and enjoy it. Last to wrap this one up, at tight end, this tight end, they have nobody signed, right? You got Drew Sample, who is a blocking tight end. You got Tanner Hudson, who is he's only like a slot tight end, like an Anthony Ferks or Cameron Brate type guy. You got Mitchell Wilcox, who's another blocking tight end. Irv Smith is definitely gone. Tanner Hudson, they could bring back as a restricted free agent, but they did announce that they're keeping their exclusive right free agents, Jake Browning and the long snapper, but they didn't announce that they're picking up the tender for Tanner Hudson. So I think he's going to hit unrestricted free agency here. He could follow offensive coordinator Brian Callahan to the Titans, or maybe they bring him back. I don't know. This is the team that they could bring in like a Hunter Henry or Dalton Schultz or whatever hits free agency. Gerald Everett, Noah Fant, Austin Hooper, whatever. But I would love to see this team draft a guy like Brock Bowers or Jatavian Sanders. I just want to warn people though, if this team drafts Brock Bowers, the upside isn't going to be super high right away because they have Chase and Higgins. Like for the short term, it's not a good landing spot. For the long term, it is a good landing spot. But for short term, I'm going to caution people, man, and I'm going to get a ton of flack for it, that the vast majority of fantasy relevant tight ends and high end upside tight ends are top 2 targets on the team. So unless you predict Brock Bowers to have more targets than one of Chase or Higgins, then he basically needs one of those guys to get hurt to have big time upside, man. So be very careful. Yeah. I mean, and then they say they get Bowers and Bowers is great. And the next year they let Higgins walk, because they're like, oh, we have Bowers. We don't need to have Higgins long-term. Then it's going to be wheels up for Brock Bowers. Like Brock Bowers is awesome no matter what. I just caution people that like people are like, oh yeah, go play with Joe Burrow. He'll be awesome right away. I think if he goes to this team, he'll be overdrafted and redraft. I would never knock him in Dynasty. So there you go. Now, if you want to go and get set up, because we're talking Dynasty here, and I know a lot of people aren't set up yet. I've been encouraging people to play. If you want to get set up, honestly, it's a pain your own Dynasty league from scratch. If you have 10 or 12 close friends that you really trust, that you know are going to pay up and you know are going to pay attention and you know they're going to do trades and then you know they're going to take it seriously, then maybe make your own league. But I honestly encourage people to do leagues on FFPC if you take it seriously like I do. If you want to do that, go to myffpc.com, use promo code Coop. They'll give you $25 when you deposit 35 or more. And you can either do a startup draft, or you can take over an orphan team. And those are super cool because you get to kind of cut all the guys that you don't like and keep the ones that you do and trade away the guys you don't like. Like, it gives you kind of a license to kill, which is fun. But the thing with those is you don't have to chase anybody down for money. You don't have to worry about your friends not paying attention because it's all very serious gamers. You can play from, anywhere from $77 to, like well over 1,000 buy-in if you want to get crazy, right? And a league over there is never folded, because if somebody wants out, then their team just becomes one of those orphan teams can get picked up. It's not like leagues with your friends where like three of your buddies are like, I don't want to do this anymore. And now because you have the best team in the league and you're a super powerhouse and the league folds because you're too good at this. That doesn't happen over at my FFPC. So go over there, use promo code Coop. They'll give you $25 when you deposit 35 or more. The link's in the description. That's the other thing that doesn't happen when you play with your buddies. If the buy-in's $50, you got to pay $50. With this one, I'm giving you $25 if you use promo code Coop. So go get set up over there, rock and roll. There you go. Mad Deutsch got it in the description, or you can click that QR code. So there you go. All right. That was you wouldn't think that talking about one team that we wouldn't be able to do 15 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, and that an hour should be plenty of time. But look at that. We've already used like a third of the show. So we're talking about Joe Mixon and people trying to, they want him fired. I don't want him fired. But anyway, let's move on to the next team here. This team, I set up the depth chart for this team a little differently than typical, just to give you a better idea of like how I view this team and how they kind of use the weapons, right? And this is everybody under contract and everybody under contract from last year and this year. Like, it fits an interesting setup here. So at quarterback, there were some rumors, right, that they could trade for Justin Fields. There were some rumors started by Chad Ochocinco that they were going to sign Russell Wilson. And then the team kind of came out and poured some cold water on that. Now, they basically came out and said, we like Kenny Pickett, we like Mason Rudolph, we're going to let Mitch Trubisky go. There's some arguments in-house about who should start, and that kind of tells us like, oh, wait a second, maybe they're just going to keep these guys. I mean, sometimes teams posture this way and try and get the price down on a Justin Fields or get the price down on a Russell Wilson, but it's they might just stick with Kenny Pickett and Mason Rudolph. And if that happens, it's going to be annoying for fantasy football, because those guys, even if they take a step forward, I mean, Kenny Pickett's never thrown more than 7 touchdowns in the season now. Even if they take a step forward, it's not going to they're not going to be able to support all these guys as weapons, right? Like, you're not going to be able to support Deontay Johnson, George Pickens, and Pat Freiermuth. So to me, we're waiting a little bit on when those guys will have true upside. They really just need a better quarterback with higher volume. Now, for the time being, and for me, I'm trading Kenny Pickett and Mason Rudolph for anything if I can in my Dynasty League, even in Superflex, because I really just don't foresee them turning things around all of a sudden because Arthur Smith is here, right? Like, Mike Tomlin's been around the entire time. They've tried multiple different coordinators. I mean, this is the third one. I just don't really think Kenny Pickett has that upside. So if you can trade him, then go ahead and do it. Yeah. As Toronto Dave says in the chat, Steelers down bad at QB. I know people still believe they're fans of different, there are Kenny Pickett fans out there. There are Mason Rudolph fans. I'm just not a huge fan. With running back, this is another one where I would prepare yourself for disappointment, because they do like Najee Harris. Over the last 3 years, 3 years combined, Najee Harris has the 4th most rushing yards of any running back. Eddie Faulkner likes him. That's the running back's coach. Mike Tomlin likes him, right? They like what he did, right? They could go out and pick up his fifth-year option. So he's under contract for this year no matter what. You pick up the fifth-year option, he's under contract for 2025 as well. It's a fairly cheap option to pick up because it's based on like the top 5 running back contracts, and because all these guys get franchise tagged and the options picked up, they nobody ever signs a big deal, so that number stays low. So don't be shocked or surprised when I think the deadline's like in May of this year. Don't be shocked or surprised when they pick up Najee Harris's contract and it's a 2 RB system. I have it set up like that in the depth chart because that's what it is. Najee Harris is a starter, the bruiser, and Jalen Warren works on pass downs, and they mix and match. Everyone loves the behind the scenes stats for Jalen Warren, the explosiveness, all those things. It's the same people that were clamoring and pounding the table for Tony Pollard. The same people want Jalen Warren to have that role. But as we saw with Tony Pollard, he might not be built to get a yard on 3rd and 1, right? So that's my concern for Jalen Warren long term. Personally, with all the hype around him, I'm a seller on Jalen Warren, and I'm kind of buying Najee Harris because he's cheap. That's just my philosophy that if they pick up that 5th-year option, by the time Jalen Warren ends up starting somewhere, he's going to be 26, 27, just like Tony Pollard is now like 26. And people are looking at Pollard and saying, do I even have a full-time running back? So that's my concern there. Sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but I do get excited about players, right? But for the most part, I try and be realistic. And in that situation, I think they like having 2 running backs, and that's not good for fantasy football. So just be careful with that. Godwin Equibuke, he is an unrestricted free agent. If they bring him back, it'll be for one thing, and one thing specifically, he returns the kicks. So maybe they want him there returning kicking, being the backup. And then Alfonso Graham, he was an unrestricted free agent. He tore his labrum, so missed the entire year. And those guys can be released for next to nothing. So for him, he's technically under contract, but he'll have to make the team just like everybody else because he wasn't even available all year this year. So that's why he's in red. We don't know if he's going to get cut, whether he's going to be back. A wide receiver, Deontay Johnson, he's a target monster. Doesn't really score a lot of touchdowns, especially when Kenny Pickett's throwing the ball. And drops have been an issue, but I don't care about drops. Deontay Johnson's the guy that I like to have because I think he's got a few more years left in him. And eventually, hopefully, he will play with a better quarterback. Guys like him, Terry McLaurin, eventually they're going to find something, right? I mean, there's been a few guys like Andre Johnson that never played with a good quarterback. Larry Fitzgerald spent a lot of years with bad quarterbacks. But Deontay Johnson's, where else are you going to find the guy that commands 130 targets every single season? So I like Deontay Johnson. George Pickens, he's definitely with the squad. He's definitely a top 2 target on the team. He needs a quarterback that trusts him to throw the jump ball because he is a jump ball artist. And he actually developed his routes this year. He had some, slants and things he took to the house. Pickens is growing on me. Typically, I don't like players like this, but he's growing on me. And then Pat Fry. Well, actually, we'll save tight end after. Allen Robinson is going to be released. No question. I'm surprised they haven't released him yet. They're going to save $11 million doing it. He didn't pan out. So Deontay Johnson, George Pickens are holds for me. Allen Robinson obviously is worth nothing. And when he gets released, I would try and trade Calvin Austin too, simply because Calvin Austin's, people are going to get excited about him being the slot wide receiver for this team. But Arthur Smith uses so many 2 tight end sets. He wants to use a fullback. If they bring in a fullback, immediately trade Calvin Austin no matter what, because a fullback means there's not really ever going to be a full-time 3rd wide receiver. But and there's been some hype around him, like J.J. Zacharyson hyped him when he was first drafted. So, you might be able to sell him. Calvin Austin, sell for me. Miles Boykin, I like the idea of them trying to bring him in he was a 2nd-round pick originally, prospect that people liked. He also was picked by the Ravens, so you get a little intel from the Ravens when they release him, but just didn't pan out with Miles Boykin, so he's got no value to me. But yeah, so that's what I'm doing with wide receiver for this team. We like Deontay, we like Pickens, Calvin Austin. If you can sell him, I would do that. At tight end, this team couldn't be more set at tight end. They drafted Pat Fry for the short term, at least for this year, because they have Pat Frymuth as the pass catching tight end, and behind him, Connor Hayward, when Frymuth got hurt, stepped in and he looked pretty good. Connor Hayward did what he had to do. He ran the routes. He was a pass catching guy. Of course, if he had a different quarterback, if there's a different offense, everybody would be better. Pat Frymuth wasn't even good in this team. So the fact that Connor Hayward stepped in and did a little something, Good. They got him on a rookie deal too. Then they have the blocking tight end, Darnell Washington. He calls himself the sixth offensive lineman. So not super exciting for fantasy, but they have a good blocking tight end. And then behind them, he's got Rodney Williams, who's also on a rookie deal. So this team, I don't expect them to do anything at tight end. I know people are like, oh, Jonnu Smith. Why would they? What is Jonnu Smith going to do? Compete with Connor Hayward to be the backup behind Freiermuth in case Freiermuth gets hurt? It's not happening. So that's it for the Steelers, man. That's what we're looking at. Going across the bottom of the screen there, if you are not set up yet with Fantasy Alarm, you got to go over and get an All-Pro membership. Now, honestly, if you play multiple sports, you probably already have it. If you're somebody that watches these shows and consumes a lot of the free content, but if you play multiple sports, you definitely should be getting it now, because the draft guide is coming out for fantasy baseball with Howard Bender, who is a monster, with Jim Bowden, who is a literal GM, right? Like a actual MLB GM helps us write our draft guide. Like his picks are all in there, especially for prospects and things like that. Go over to fantasyalarm.com right now /win. Get set up with the All Pro. We have all that. You get all the baseball picks, all the basketball. James Grande and Iggy and John and Pemba have been crushing that. You get all our hockey picks with Chris and the gang. Our NASCAR writer Matt Sells, 3-time NASCAR writer of the year. I think at this stage they're just trying to give it to other people because they can't just give it to the same guy every year. But he is the best in the business. Our MMA guy crushes, right? And of course, you got me in there in the Discord, and doing all the fantasy football stuff, doing an article every single day. Get set up over at fantasyalarm.com/win. Become an All-Pro member now. And even if you just do football, we're starting up the best ball drafts over with the members starting soon in the Discord. So get set up with that now. It's time to rock and roll. There's no better time than right now, right before the start of baseball. So right before the combine, all our dynasty rankings, all our rookie rankings are going to be in there. It's going to be sweet. So that's it for that. Yeah, and Pemba does crush the NBA stuff, man. It is nuts. And Iggy with the gambling stuff, he was on such a crazy heater that he could go like 0 for 40 and still be up on money. Iggy. I don't really even play much fantasy baseball, but I love watching the show with Grande and Pemba. Just it's entertaining, man. And they know their stuff. It's like I wouldn't say it's like watching a TV show in Spanish, because I do understand what they're talking about, but like the stats they pull are like so crazy to me. Like they're so out of left field because I'm plugged in with the football stuff. Today, after the show, we have the tight end combine, 3 p.m. I tweeted out my prospects for that, but we got some guys that we're looking for. 40 times are actually super important for tight ends versus, people will say like, oh, it doesn't matter for other positions. For tight end, it does, because that's the difference between a guy like George Kittle that has a crazy breakaway speed, or some of these middle of the pack Jake Fergusons of the world or whatever that aren't going to ever have a 50-yard touchdown or 60-yard touchdown. But anyway, let's get to the next team here. We just covered the Bengals. We just covered the Steelers. Got to get to the Brownies, right? And this team, man, you know it, I know it. It's been pretty ugly for the Brownsters. And they, in typical Browns fashion, they go out, they try to get value by trading for Deshaun Watson, but they throw all the value out the window by giving me a crazy guaranteed contract and trading a ton for him. It's like, you talk about buying low on a player. They actually bought high on a player that everyone kind of hates, right? But here is my dose of fantasy football truth right now. In reality, Deshaun Watson is the starting quarterback for the Browns. Deshaun Watson is better than Joe Flacco. Let's get that out there right now. Like, people were talking about, I've had people on Reddit and all over the place saying Joe Flacco should be the starting quarterback for the Browns. Get real. Deshaun Watson last year with a torn rotator cuff, like he had a strain and a micro tear in his shoulder, right? He went 5-1 on this team with the torn rotator cuff. Deshaun Watson, if you, even with the last 2 years in the Browns, if you take all quarterbacks all time in the NFL and sort them by fantasy points per game, Deshaun Watson is like 3 or 4. He's easily top 5. I was looking at it just the other day. Deshaun Watson is good. He's going to be good again. So I know people want to root against him. That's fine. You're absolutely entitled to root against him. I know people want to dislike him. You're absolutely entitled to dislike him. You know, when I was younger and I was a Patriots fan, guess what? I didn't like LaDainian Tomlinson, but I still took him 1 overall in fantasy football because he was good. And I think Deshaun Watson is going to come back and have good seasons, tremendous seasons, like he did on terrible Texans teams. I watched this guy on a Texans team that won 4 games go out and throw like 30 touchdowns and 7 picks. So if you're looking for, if you're a real gamer and you don't care about the noise and you don't care about feelings, you don't care about those types of things, Deshaun Watson's a buy right now in fantasy football. Yeah, because there's not many guys that are pretty much locked in to, top 10 quarterbacks in the league. He's not even 30 yet. Like Deshaun Watson, I'm telling you guys, he's probably going to have play some good football. Unless the only ways that we can say, I mean, what do we really think is going to happen? Do we think that maybe he like lost his mojo because of this whole thing and his confidence and he's just not good anymore? He can't think properly anymore about the position? Is that what people think is going to happen? Do people think that his shoulder, like the shoulder issues he had last year, where he had the tear and then eventually he broke the bone? Do people think that his shoulder is shot now? Do people think that he was never good? I mean, what was all those great seasons, all the top 5 seasons every single year that he was healthy? Like what every time people say, "Oh yeah, yeah, blah blah, blah he stinks, Joe Flacco's better." I ask, "Well, what is it? Like what is it?" And what it turns out is that they just don't want him to be good, right? They're rooting against him. That's what it is. It's not that they actually don't think he is good. So I think Deshaun Watson's going to be just fine. And you know what? Crucify me for saying it, but I care about fantasy points. That's the point of the game here, right? So I'm buying my fantasy leagues, and I'm not buying a jersey, but I'm rooting for him to score fantasy points. Joe Flacco could fit in somewhere. I mean, he brought a team to the playoffs last year. He's 39 years old. He's good for fantasy football because he keeps a high tempo, right? Likes to huck it, chuck it. Did so with the Browns, did so with the Jets. So I'm hoping he lands somewhere. And he has no interest in running the ball. I think he had like 2 rushing yards last year, maybe. He might have had negative rushing yards. Like Joe Flacco he's not going to steal any goal line touchdowns. He's not going to scramble around. He's going to dump it down the running back. So I hope he gets a spot. Dorian Thompson Robinson, I put him at DTR on the chart here because his name is so long, it's messing the whole chart up. But that's who DTR is, Dorian Thompson Robinson. He was a rookie. He kind of got his shot and they didn't really pan out. Same with, PJ Walker didn't really work out. The fact that they brought in Flacco really hurts those guys for the short term, especially because it tells you that they didn't think that these guys were ready. DTR at the very least is a long-term developmental plan. So the Browns might have to bring in another quarterback to be the backup quarterback for the short term. You know what I mean? Like they might have to go out and get it's not Flacco, maybe a Jacoby Brissett, Joshua Dobbs, Drew Lock, Mitch Trubisky's out there now, so something like that to back up Watson. At running back, Nick Chubb is awesome. And this is just the unfortunate reality of this game and the business of this game is that he just tore his knee up at the worst possible time because if he did it last year, he had, but if he did it going into last year where he had 10 million guaranteed on his deal, they would just say, hey, you know what? We just got to wait for him to be back. But now doing it now, they can release him with only 4 million dead cap, 11 million in cap space. I mean, like 11 million is like to put in perspective. The Giants could tag Saquon Barkley for 12 million, and they're saying that they don't want to pay that for Saquon Barkley, who's healthy. Like Nick Chubb's getting 15 million, and they can get 11 million back if they cut him. Here's what I would do to keep Nick Chubb if I was the Browns. In football, you have incentives. If you do incentive-based contracts, there's 2 flavors. There's likely to be earned incentives and not likely to be earned. And the only difference in them is that it's based on what you did last year, right? So if a guy runs for 1,000 yards and you set the contract at the incentive at 900 yards, now it's considered likely to be earned, and that entire incentive cost against the cap. If you set it at 1,100 yards, now it's not likely to be earned, and it doesn't count against the cap this year. It would next year if he hits it, but not this year, right? So because Nick Chubb only ran for like 180 yards before he got hurt, you could hypothetically give him a contract that has incentives that are, like run for 300 yards, right? Now, because he's hurt and we don't know when he's going to be back, he might not want to do that. But if they do an incentive-based contract, they convert his current contract into a highly incentive-based contract where the incentives aren't even that high, but we know that he can probably hit them, they could probably pay him a lot of money, even 15 million and have a way lower cap hit. So that's what I would do. You got to convince Nick Chubb, like Nick, and the business savvy side of it. The other part is that you can find out how Nick Chubb feels about whether he can play or not. Because if he doesn't want to do that at all, if he doesn't think he can have 300 rushing yards, then that means he doesn't feel confident that he's going to be back, and you might just have to release him anyway. But if he's willing to work with the team and do a contract like that, and then he comes back and he's healthy, and you give him every chance to earn that money, then that would work out best for everybody. So that's what I would do. I'm not a GM, but that's exactly how I would handle the Nick Chubb situation. If Nick Chubb does get released, Jerome Ford would be the next man up. I watched Jerome Ford last year play football, and it was okay. It wasn't anything special. It was frustrating at times. And if they cut Nick Chubb, I think the first thing I would do in my fantasy league is trade Jerome Ford. I don't have Jerome Ford in any fantasy leagues, but that's probably the first thing I would do, just because I think his value would never be higher than it is, and I don't trust him to be great, right? So Jerome Ford is what it is. He's a good backup, though. Kareem Hunt, if they're going to keep Chubb and piece it together, maybe they bring Hunt back, right? They brought him back, and he was kind of like they kind of had a weird rotation where they brought him at the very end of games with to play in the fourth quarter a lot. Maybe they were kind of keeping like fresh legs and bringing him in. It's a very strange setup, but maybe they do that. And then Pierre Strong, they traded for him from the Patriots. The fact that he didn't really carve anything out, despite Nick Chubb getting hurt, is not ideal. He's crazy fast, ran like a 4.27, like, we're talking like 99th percentile speed. Go check Player Profiler for that, but I think it actually is like either 100 or 99. And that's why he returns kicks. So I think he'll be back to return kicks for this team at the very least. Crazy speed, hasn't really developed into anything much yet on offense. At wide receiver, Amari Cooper locked in. Last year, he had the most touchdowns he's ever had. This year, he had the most yards he's ever had. Amari Cooper playing great football. Got to be happy with that move they made. Elijah Moore, he's the one that's like on the fringe. If they don't do anything, then he's got some upside there. He's competing with David Njoku to be the wide receiver too. And you have to remember that Deshaun Watson preferred throwing it downfield. David Njoku got more targets with the backups than he did with Watson. So we'll get to him in a second. But Elijah Moore, there's room for opportunity here if they don't bring anybody in. If they do bring another wide receiver in, he would be dust, right? And he hasn't been super productive, but there is a world where Watson's the QB and he's the wide receiver too, and he looks really good. Cedric Tillman was good enough as a field stretcher that they traded Donovan Peoples-Jones to the Lions, which, that's good for him. Now the next step for him for fantasy relevancy is that he needs to prove that he's not just a field stretcher, that he's not just a straight line guy that takes the safeties with him, is going to be super inconsistent. He needs to prove that he can have the big real route tree, like a Tyler Lockett or a Tyreek Hill, where their speed stretches the field, but they also run enough routes that they can get consistent targets, like a Brandon Cooks, right? So we'll have to see if he can do that. Hard to say early on, but it's possible. I mean, it's a good sign that they got rid of Donovan Peoples-Jones. That's for sure, because he plays the same role. He just took over that role. Marquise Goodwin, former Olympian, is just depth for that role. David Bell was supposed to be the slot guy. The fact they traded for Elijah Moore kind of was the death knell for David Bell, so I'm not really interested in him. He can be cut. They save like $1 million cutting him with like $400K dead cap, so he could be released. James Proche, the argument to bring him back is simple, right? After they traded Donovan Peoples-Jones, James Proche returned virtually every punt for this team. So somebody's got to return punts. That's the argument to bring him back. He's an unrestricted free agent, as you can see on the chart. And then Michael Woods is probably the player that I would say, if you had to ask me one player I think is getting cut for sure, I would say Michael Woods, because he unfortunately tore his Achilles tendon. And then while he was recovering from that, he did something that was deemed conduct detrimental to the team, where they suspended him for 6 games. So it's like, how are you going to, it's like that, how are you going to get fired on your day off? Like, Michael Woods was not even eligible to play at all because he tore his Achilles. And then he was doing something that they didn't like so much that they said, even though you can't play and you can't do anything, you're just rehabbing, you're suspended. So Michael Woods, dude, I mean, that's why I'm thinking this guy's cut for sure. And they save $1 million with only $900,000 in dead cap, which is like nothing. So like Michael Woods probably not a Brown this year. Tight end, David Njoku, awesome, stepped up. Again, I don't want to take too much time here because I talked about how I already kind of mentioned it with Elijah Moore that we have to see what Deshaun Watson wants to do. Amari Cooper's locked in. They're probably only going to have one other truly fantasy relevant pass catcher. I think it's Njoku. That's why I have him in green. I'm rooting for Njoku. I'm a tight end fan. So I think it's going to be him. But if Elijah Moore is consistently getting more targets than David Njoku in these games, then that's concerning. So you got to keep an eye on that. But we'll worry about that later. Harrison Bryant's an unrestricted free agent. I talked about it on the Patriots show that I think he would be a good candidate to go to the Patriots because the Browns offensive coordinator, Alex Van Pelt from last year, is now the Patriots offensive coordinator. So maybe he goes over there. So we'll have to see. If that happens, they'll need another inline tight end, maybe an Austin Hooper, Drew Sample, Jeff Swaim, Adam Trotman, Michael Pruitt. I feel like every time I say Michael Pruitt, somebody X's out of the YouTube. They're like, all right, we've gotten to the point where I don't care. So maybe I should stop saying Michael Pruitt, but that's what they need. They have a pass catching tight end. They need a blocking tight end. Jordan Akins can be that guy too. He's a journeyman. He's been around for a while. So that's your Cleveland Brownies, right? And I'll tell you what, over at FFPC, I talked about the dynasty that they have going on. If you want to go, X out the wrong thing. If you want to go over to my FFPC and say you don't like playing Dynasty, but you want to take advantage of all the stuff we're talking about on these shows, like all the things that could happen in free agency, who could go up, who could go down, who's being underdrafted, who's being undervalued. If you don't want to play Dynasty, they actually have their way too early best ball contest right now where you can not only draft all these guys we're talking about, but also the rookies, right? If you want to take like Malik Neighbors or Marvin Harrison Jr. and plant your flag on these guys before they get drafted, you can do that now. So if you use promo code Coop, they'll give you $25 when you deposit 35 or more as a first-time player. But you can go over to myffpc.com and get involved right now and draft best ball teams right now that have all the rookies. They have all these guys. If you think that this is the year for Elijah Moore, go get him. You know what I mean? If you think Deshaun Watson's going to bounce back or David Njoku is going to have his best year ever, go get set up right now and go do that. So myffpc.com, way too early best ball. And if you use promo code Coop, they'll give you $25 when you deposit 35 or more as a first-time depositor. So go check that out. Well, folks, we have about 10 minutes left. Talked a little too long about the Bengals, but that doesn't mean we're not going to talk about the final team here in this division, and that is the Baltimore Ravens, baby. Baltimore Ravens, I mean, honestly, they're looking pretty good besides running back. That's what they need here. And when I say that it's problematic, man, they got this is what's going on at running back. You've got J.K. Dobbins, who just tore his Achilles tendon, and no one's had worse luck than this guy. So Dobbins, not only is an unrestricted free agent, but he tore his Achilles, so he's probably not back. You got Keaton Mitchell, who's under contract, but he tore his ACL. So, I'll just go through them quick. Gus Edwards is an unrestricted free agent. Justice Hill is the only one healthy running back under contract right now, right? So let's say you did bring back all four of these guys, you would actually only have two healthy players in Gus Edwards and Justice Hill because Dobbins and Keaton Mitchell aren't expected to be ready to start the season. So if you brought all four of these guys back, you probably still need to bring in another running back. That's why I think they have to let J.K. Dobbins walk. Another team should take a flyer on him as like a developmental player, as like, a bounce back or whatever, a project. But this team can't afford to do it because Keaton Mitchell also got hurt. The really interesting thing at running back is if you go over to, a site like Draft, a sports book like DraftKings, they'll offer odds on players for their next team, right? And, they got like Russell Wilson and, Justin Fields, all those guys up there. They have Derrick Henry up there because we know he's probably going to get cut. And they have odds for him going back to the Titans, but those aren't even the best odds. The team that has the best odds to land Derrick Henry is the Baltimore Ravens. And those odds are set at like plus 110, basically like $100 to get $100. which is, I mean, that's like of all the teams and stuff, that's one of the highest ones. I mean, like the Vegas is predicting that this team signs Derrick Henry. And it would be great for what Derrick Henry does, just in general, because Lamar Jackson historically hasn't thrown to the running back much. He doesn't really like to because he looks downfield. He likes to take it himself. Well, Derrick Henry isn't a big pass catching back, so it doesn't really affect the production we've come to expect from him. The other thing is that Todd Monken does like designed running back screens, right? They ran 28 running back screens last year. Justice Hill got 13 of them. Derrick Henry can do screens. He does them very well. So with those designed pass plays that are the screens and stuff, he does well on those. Running routes and things like that, he doesn't do as well. And of course, the big killer is you can run the RPO, the run pass option with Lamar Jackson. With Derrick Henry, he would probably, even at his age, run for 5 yards a carry. So it is kind of the perfect spot for him. I'm rooting for it. Derrick Henry, that would be the best thing for Derrick Henry's value, and he fits the system perfectly. So throw Derrick Henry right on there. Let's just get it done. I'm on board. For QB, because I jumped right to running back, Lamar Jackson, 2-time MVP. He's a star. The question for Lamar Jackson in Dynasty is this. When you look around at mobile quarterbacks in the NFL long term, there's only ever been 2 quarterbacks that have had over 100 carries after the age of 27. Michael Vick and Cam Newton. Cam Newton did it at the oldest at 31 for the New England Patriots. He had over 100 carries, but he was at that stage was kind of beat up pretty, we were kind of washed essentially, but he did score 12 rushing touchdowns. But Lamar Jackson's run the ball over 100 times every year of his career. He is 27 years old now. What we've seen is we see guys transition to less designed runs and less runs in general and start passing the ball more, like Russell Wilson. He's the perfect example. Up until he was 27, he was running the ball 100 times, running all over the place. When he turned 20, and he was only throwing like 450 times a year. When he turned 28, 29 years old, now he's throwing the ball 550 times a year and was, not running it 100 times. Like that's the transition that we see these guys go through. Keep an eye on Lamar Jackson, who is 27. Josh Allen, also 27. I think these guys for the next couple years can still be rushing quarterbacks. At 27, 28, 29 can be fully rushing quarterbacks. At a certain point, they need to switch from being rushing quarterbacks to being mobile quarterbacks. It's just too much wear and tear in this league. So that's the transition we want to see from Lamar Jackson. Tyler Huntley, if I'm him, I'm going out and I'm trying to win a starting job on another team. You can always come back and be a backup. But if you sign a long-term backup deal, then that's just what you are, right? And look at Geno Smith. He hit the lottery. We're talking like Geno Smith everyone was saying just going to be a backup in this league. In which case you're getting $4, $5, $6 million a year, whatever. Geno Smith went out and hit the lottery for $100 million. So Tyler Huntley should at least go out and try. And then if that doesn't work, then you come back and be backup. So I expect Tyler Huntley to be gone. It's in his best interest. At backup, they need a backup for Lamar. Malik Cunningham is, he could be wide receiver. He's a project. He's not a real backup. Josh Johnson's more of a coach at this stage than he is like a true backup that can play. If I was them, I wouldn't mess around. I'd go get like a Jacoby Brissett or somebody that has enough mobility to step in and be the guy if something happens. Obviously Tyler Huntley would be ideal if he would stay, but it's like Jacoby Brissett, Tyrod Taylor, Mariota, Mitch Trubisky, Drew Lock, anybody. You know what I mean? You got to have a backup for Lamar Jackson in case he gets hurt. At wide receiver, it should say wide receiver next to Zay Flowers. That was my fault. So it says running back. Zay Flowers played, he was playing like 99% of the snaps at times, which is very rare for the Ravens. So they love him. He's a buy. Rashad Bateman is another guy that I personally like. And the coaches came out and said that they have big plans for him, that he finally got healthy down the stretch. I'm still in on Rashad Bateman. I know a lot of people are getting out. I have to be positive on some people on the show, right? Rashad Bateman's a guy that I'm still in on. So I like Flowers. I like Bateman. Nelson Aguilar, they brought him back already. They extended him to a 1-year deal, so he'll be back. maybe in deep best ball, but I'm not super interested. They talk about they love Odell. They say he's a great guy, great friends. They want him to be back. Basically, what they're doing is they're posturing and saying, "Hey, Odell, if you want to come back on a cheap, affordable deal, we love you and you're part of the family." Right? That's what they're asking Odell to do. They want him back, but they don't want to pay him a lot of money. He's a part-time player at this stage, so it's all up to him whether and whether a team wants to give him a bunch of money or not. But if he is gone, then I'm with Anthony. They could sign or draft a wide receiver. I don't think they're going to. I don't think they have the ability or the need to go up and take some and sign someone as a free agent that'll go ahead of a Rashad Bateman, right? Because if you're not getting Michael Pittman and you're not getting, Tee Higgins is already franchise tag. If you're not getting Michael Pittman and you're not getting uh, Mike Evans, who is definitively better than Rashad Bateman, right? Marquise Brown is not coming back because he was already there, right? So no Marquise Brown. Calvin Ridley, I mean, maybe Calvin Ridley. Calvin Ridley probably would be, one of the name. After that, you're talking about like what? Curtis Samuel, Kendrick Bourne. Are these guys better than Rashad Bateman? Not in my opinion. DJ Chark, like these are legitimately the next best options after the guys I just named. If they're not signing Calvin Ridley, then there's really nobody that's better than Rashad Bateman that's going to come in. So I think that's the deal. Maybe they'll draft somebody though, Anthony. There's a deep draft class, so I could see that and probably be smart. Put some pressure on Rashad Bateman. Hey, Zay Flowers is a guy. We're bringing in another guy to compete with you. And if you're the guy, then great. If he's the guy, then that's the way it is. Tylan Wallace is a potential cut candidate. Sorry, Lindellians and the Oklahoma State fans, but he just hasn't really panned out. He doesn't really have a major role. He could still be on the team though. He does play some special teams. Devin Duvernay is a guy that he's an unrestricted free agent. He returned virtually every punt and kick for this team. That's the argument to bring Devin Duvernay back. Could happen. Yeah. I see a better boss. Tyler, you would be a Tylan Wallace guy. I mean, you know what? We'll see. But he just the fact that he wasn't able to carve anything out just yet, I'd rather see him go somewhere else and try and catch on somewhere else. At tight end, this team is overloaded at tight end. They've got Mark Andrews, Isaiah Likely, Charlie Kohler. I like all three of them, but they got to figure out a way to get Mark Andrews and Likely on the field at the same time. The problem is they're neither one is an inline tight end. They both play like 80% of their snaps at wide receiver. So difficult to get those guys on the field at the same time unless you basically just treat Isaiah Likely like a wide receiver the way you would do Mark Andrews and just roll with the biggest wide receivers in the league. Charlie Kohler, good inline tight end. He's a long-term stash for me. Like Delaney Walker didn't break out until he was 30. Sometimes it happens like that. Patrick Ricard at fullback, they love him. They also have him play some inline tight end. So this team doesn't need a tight end. They don't need a fullback. They're good to go. That's it, ladies and gentlemen. Another solo, psychotic, 1 hour breakdown of a division. Next week, I don't know. I got 2 divisions left with free agency coming up. This has been a contentious point with me and some behind the scenes here on how our schedule kind of got mixed up. So I might just do one show next week and just hit on everything as fast as possible. Maybe I'll do 2 shows. Maybe I'll do an hour and a half show. Maybe I'll do 2-hour show. Maybe I'll do a 7-hour show next Friday talking about free agency. I don't know. I don't care. I'll be here. I'm chatting. But thank you guys for joining me in the chat. Matt, thank you behind the glass. Everybody, go get set up with your all-pro membership at Fantasy Alarm. Right down fantasyalarm.com/win. Get in the Discord. We're going to be doing best ball drafts. Maybe we'll even do a dynasty draft, But we got all that stuff going on. And then go over to myffpc.com. Use promo code Coop and get set up. They'll give you $25 when you deposit 35 or more if you're a first-time depositor. You can go and do a dynasty startup over there. You can grab an orphan team and dissect it and throw away the pieces you don't want and keep the ones you do and trade for all the guys you want. And you can do their way too early best ball draft and go out and draft all these rookies, draft all these guys before the draft even happens in real life. If you're fired up about the combine this week, way too early best ball. You watch a guy, he's doing the drills, doing spin moves, doing cool stuff, crushing the interviews, right? Go out, draft him while he's cheap before an NFL team drafts him and he goes way up. That's over at myffpc.com. Use promo code Coop. All right, guys, that's it for me. I'm out of here. Have a good weekend. Enjoy the combine.